By the time Genevieve Ravencrest saw the border markers, she could no longer feel two fingers on her left hand. Iron cuffs bit into both wrists, yanked her forward by the middle, like she was being yanked 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 by the middle, yanked her forward by the middle, like she was an animal led to market. Maybe that was mercy. Animals were at least worth the trouble of feeding. Keep moving, her escort barked over his shoulder. Garen, her mother's brother, once the loudest voice at her naming feast, now her handler. You shame us enough without crawling. Genevieve swallowed blood where she'd bitten the inside of her cheek and forced her numb feet into the slush. Late winter mud sucked at her boots. Frost crusted the hems of her dress, the one they had given her this morning because it was fit for treaty presentation. Gray wool too thin for the wind, no cloak, no gloves. For peace, because Ravencrest had lost for peace, because Ravencrest had lost 3 skirmishes in 4 months and could no longer hold the eastern passes. At the final ridge, Garen reined in and looked back at her with open disgust. When you kneel, keep your eyes down. Don't pretend you're still a daughter of this pack. I was never pretending, Genevieve said, voice raw. I was born one. His lip curled. You were born weak. Your wolf barely rises. Your healing never settled into full gift. You are exactly what tribute is for. Behind her, another rider laughed. Maybe Valewood will breed something useful out of her. Heat surged up her throat. Humiliation, rage, old hurt she had learned to hide behind lowered lashes. She held it down. She had learned that too. The valley opened below them. Torch lines, timber palisades, banners snapping in the wind. Dark green field with the silver pine of Valewood. At the Borderstone clearing, 2 long tables had been set beneath awnings, already crowded with wolves in formal leathers and polished bone pins. Peace meat smoked on iron spits. Barrels were stacked near the fire trench. It looked like a wedding feast thrown for a funeral. She was marched straight through the middle aisle as conversation stuttered, then stopped. Valewood eyes tracked her chains first, then her face, then the Ravencrest crest sewn crooked on her shoulder. A murmur went through the crowd like dry grass catching. At the far end stood 3 Valewood elders and their war alpha. If rumors were true, the war alpha was more than that. Nikolai Valewood, the hidden Alpha King, scarred, unbroken, unmated. He was taller than she expected, broad through the shoulders, dark hair tied at the nape, jaw shadowed with old fatigue. A pale seam cut from his right temple down into his beard line. Another scar, not pale but angry red, crossed his palm where he rested it against the table edge, as if it had split recently and never healed right. She looked away first. Not from fear, she told herself, from survival. The formal terms were recited in a clerk's dry voice while snow began to spit from a low iron sky. By agreed blood and border law, the clerk intoned, Ravencrest relinquishes Genevieve Ravencrest, daughter of late Beta Lucian, to Valewood custody for a term not less than 20 years. Custody? Genevieve laughed once, sharp and disbelieving. Garen struck her across the mouth so hard her head snapped sideways. Silence. Tribute. No one from Ravencrest protested. Nikolai's gaze moved to the blood at the corner of her lip. Something changed in his expression. Small, dangerous, but he said nothing. Passage. When it was done, Garen passage. When it was done, Garen unclipped the chain from his saddle and shoved her to her knees before the Valewood table. Delivered as promised. He didn't look at her when he stepped back. That was the abandonment then. Not the manacles, not the bruise blooming on her face, not the signatures pressed into treaty wax. The way her own pack left her kneeling in the mud and reached for wine. Valewood servants moved to take the chains. Before they could, an old woman rose from the neutral bench between pack delegations, knocking her cup over. The healer, court-appointed, gray-braided, cloud-eyed, and feared by both sides, because she'd called 2 famines and 1 plague year. Dead true. Wait, she snapped. The whole clearing paused. She crossed to Genevieve with unsettling speed, seized her wrist in both hands, and went still. Her pupils blew wide black. Her voice, when it came, was thin and wrong, as if spoken through water. Bring me Valewood's war alpha, now. Nikolai was already moving. Torchlight slid across the scars on his face as he stepped down into the center space. The healer grabbed his forearm, then dragged him and Genevieve together into the brightest ring of firelight where everyone could see. She lifted their bound wrists for the crowd. If these 2 are bound as mates, she said, every word carrying across the hush. Only one survives the 7th night. Silence slammed down so hard Genevieve could hear the spit and hiss of fat dripping into the trench flames. Then a new voice cut through, warm as honey over a blade. Well, said Caspian Ironhold from the edge of the torchline, that certainly simplifies succession. He stepped into view in polished black leather, silver wolf head clasp at his throat, smile easy and bright and absolutely bloodless. He spread his hands in theatrical peace. I came only to witness treaty compliance, he said to no one and everyone. Please, continue. Genevieve knew that smile. Not him personally, but men like him. Men who arrived when disasters were ripest and called it timing. In that instant, kneeling in mud with prophecy hanging over her like a noose, she understood with vicious clarity. She was not tribute. She was bait. The feast resumed in pieces, like a body learning how to move after a broken spine. Voices rose too loud. Cups were refilled too fast. Every glance at Genevieve now carried calculation, superstition, hunger, fear. Some looked at her as if she were already a grave. Others looked at Nikolai. Nikolai stood at the edge of the central fire, still as carved stone, speaking low with 2 Valewood lieutenants. Caspian drifted between tables, clasping shoulders, murmuring condolences no one had asked for. 3 Ravencrest wolves were already bargaining for better trade terms, as if they hadn't sold a living woman an hour ago. A Valewood elder with white braids and fox fur cuffs pointed at Genevieve's shackles. Keep her secured until this omen settles. Caspian turned with sympathetic concern painted on his face. A prudent measure. Fear makes wolves reckless. Genevieve's stomach turned. She sat on a bench near the supply awning, wrists still chained, ignored except by a young servant who set down broth and never met her eyes. Around her, words drifted like gnats. 7th night. Mate death curse. Could take the alpha with her. Lock her in silver. Lock her. Isolate her. Wait for one of them to die and call it fate. Across the clearing, Garen was mounting up with the Ravencrest escort. He did not come say goodbye. He did not look back. Something in Genevieve finally cracked. Not loudly, not theatrically, quietly, like river ice splitting beneath weight that had been there too long. If she stayed where they put her, she would die in a cage, or Nikolai would, and men like Caspian would feast over the corpse. If she waited for mercy from either pack, she would wait until bone. Run now, whispered the oldest part of her, the part that had kept breathing through years of polite cruelty. Run before they decide where to bury you. She lowered her head and tested the manacles again. Heavy, but the pin on the left cuff had been bent when Garen struck her. She'd felt it bite crooked ever since. If she had leverage, she slid from the bench as if to retch, ducked behind stacked casks, and shoved the cuff against the iron hoop of a barrel rack. Once, twice. Pain flashed up her arm. 3rd time, the weakened pin snapped. The cuff opened enough to skin half her hand as she yanked free. Shouts erupted before she fully stood. "Tributes loose!" she bolted. Cold air hit like knives. She ran between supply tents, ducked under guy ropes, hurdled a crate, and sent clay cups exploding. Someone grabbed for her hair. She twisted, lost a strip of braid, kept moving. Mud sucked at her boots. A horn bellowed behind her, then another. "Stop her!" The palisade gate loomed ahead, half open for wagon passage. 2 guards moved to block it. Genevieve veered right, slammed into a woodpile, climbed, slipped, clawed up again, and threw herself over the lower side where logs met the outer ditch. She landed hard, rolled, and the world went white for a heartbeat. Up. Move. She staggered into the tree line beyond the torchlight, branches whipping her face, lungs burning raw. The forest swallowed sound in wet, needled dark. Snow thickened overhead, fat flakes melting on her lashes. Behind her came the hunt. Feet, voices, the crash of bodies shifting. Wolves. She ran until her breath tore, until the freed cuff banged against her wrist like a bell, until she no longer knew if she was going downhill or into the earth itself. Roots snagged her skirt. A branch ripped her palm. She tasted copper and pine. When she finally stumbled into a narrow clearing ringed by standing stones half sunk in moss, she had nothing left. She spun back to the tallest stone, chest heaving, and lifted the short eating knife she'd stolen from the feast table. Pathetic weapon. Better than bare hands. Shapes moved between the trees. 4, 6, maybe more. Valewood sentries in wolf form, eyes gleaming green gold in the dark. They circled but did not close. Then the circling stopped. A man stepped through the pines as if the forest itself had made room. No cloak despite the snow, dark shirt open at the throat. Scar down his face catching moonlight. Nikolai. He looked larger out here than he had by the fire, not from size, but from force. Can put me in a silver cage? His jaw can put me in a silver cage? His jaw tightened. No one cages what is under my protection. I am not yours. Something flashed in his eyes. Anger, maybe, or hurt. She had no right to see. He took one step closer. The wolves behind him held position, silent. Genevieve slashed the knife through the air between them. Don't. Your left cuff is cutting to the bone, he said, voice lower now. You're bleeding through your boot. You won't make another mile. Then let me die where you can't use me. At that, his control slipped. I am not Ironhold. He moved fast then, not attacking, but reaching to catch her wrist before she could lunge or fall. She jerked away. The knife nicked across his palm, right over that angry old scar. He hissed, grip reflexively tightening around her forearm. Warm blood spilled from his reopened hand and slid over her skin. The world detonated. Heat slammed through her body from wrist to spine, molten and immediate. Her wolf, usually timid and buried, surged forward so violently her knees nearly buckled. Air turned thick with smoke and pine and male skin and winter steel. Every sound dropped away except his breathing. Every scent vanished except him. Nikolai froze as if struck by lightning. His pupils blew wide. A growl ripped out of him, deep, furious, possessive enough to shake snow from branches. In a single motion, he pulled her behind his body and bared his teeth at his own sentries. No one moved. Genevieve stared at the blood drying red-black between their hands and knew, with terror and impossible longing braided tight in her chest, that the healer's seventh night had just started. The sentries dropped their gazes first. Not all the way, not submission, not in front of a war alpha in the middle of the forest, but enough to acknowledge what had just happened. Enough that Genevieve understood this was no private madness between her body and his blood. The wolves around them had scented it too. Nikolai's hand was still clamped around her forearm. Not painfully, unyieldingly. His breath came once, sharp through his teeth. Then he looked back at her. She had seen men look at women with hunger before. She had seen ownership, contempt, bargaining interest, lust drunk on power. This was none of those things. This was recognition so total it made her feel skinned open. His gold-flecked eyes locked on hers, and for one blinding, suspended instant she had the sick certainty that if she stepped back, something inside both of them would tear. Her pulse hammered. Warmth kept racing outward from the place his blood had touched her, shooting through her chest, down her spine, into the deepest, oldest part of her. Her wolf, small, wary, usually curled silent at the back of her mind, was suddenly on its feet, pacing, pressing hard against her skin as if it had found a door it meant to break through. Mate, it breathed. No, Genevieve whispered, though she did not know whether she said it to him, to herself, or to the beast rising inside her. Nikolai heard. His expression changed with brutal precision. First shock, then fury. Not at her, but at the word itself. At fate. At the healer. At the ring of wolves who had witnessed this in the dark. His thumb shifted once against the inside of her wrist, finding the racing beat there as if he couldn't help confirming she was real. Behind him, one of the sentries took a half-step forward. Alpha! Nikolai turned his head, and the growl that came out of him was so low Genevieve felt it more than heard it, a vibration through the frozen ground. The wolf stopped dead. No one comes closer, Nikolai said. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The sentries backed off another pace. Genevieve's knife was still in her hand. She realized it only when her fingers spasmed and the blade dropped into the snow. Her hand had gone weak. Heat and trembling kept sweeping through her in alternating waves, as if her body could not decide whether to lunge into him or flee into the dark. This cannot be happening. This cannot be him. The male she had been traded to, the one a healer had just tied to her death, the one every whisper named as either war alpha or king in all but title. The scent of him wrapped around her now. Smoke, pine resin, cold air, male blood, and her body answered with humiliating, involuntary certainty. Safety, hunger, home, terror. She hated it instantly. She hated the way her knees weakened, hated the way her lungs wanted more of his scent. hated the hot, aching pull low in her belly and the strange loosening in her chest, as if some iron band she'd worn all her life had suddenly been cut. Clinging to her lashes, the broken cuff clinging to her lashes, the broken cuff hanging from her wrist. Possession flashed there, raw enough to scare her, but so did something else. Horror. At the prophecy, she realized, at what binding to her might cost. His hand opened at once, releasing her as though he feared his own grip. He stepped back a single measured pace, forcing distance between them despite the visible effort it cost him. "Genevieve," he said, and hearing her name in his voice was another shock entirely, rougher than she expected. "Careful. Look at me. I am looking at you." "No." His throat worked once. Properly. As if she hadn't already been stripped by that gaze, as if she hadn't felt the entire world narrow to the line between them. But she looked. Moonlight and snow made his scars harsher, the pale seam along his temple, the rough healed line through his palm now bleeding freely again. His pupils were still too wide. Gold burned brighter around them, wolf close to the surface. He looked like violence barely leashed. He also looked as shaken as she felt. That did something dangerous to her fear. "We do nothing tonight without your consent," he said, each word clipped, controlled. "Nothing. Do you understand?" The sentries behind him exchanged startled glances. Wolves of his rank did not explain themselves. They certainly did not offer terms to tribute women in the woods. Genevieve wrapped her freed hand around her cuffed wrist to stop the shaking. "You say that now." His face hardened. "I say it as Alpha Law. Alpha Law made me tribute this morning. Not mine." He said it with such flat certainty that she almost believed him. Almost. A dizzy spell hit her then, abrupt and sharp. The clearing tipped. Nikolai moved before she could stop him, one arm bracing her shoulders as her weight pitched forward. Heat slammed through her again at the contact. She sucked in a breath that came out embarrassingly close to a gasp. His nostrils flared. He went utterly still. Locked that way, chest to chest for one impossible second, they stared at each other while the bond between them throbbed like a fresh wound. Then he lifted his head and said to the wolves without looking away from her, "Bring no one else." We return to the pack house. If any elder asks, she is under my direct protection. A sentry hesitated. The council may object. Nikolai's eyes flashed fully gold. Then they may object to my face. No one argued after that. He did not carry her, though she knew he could have. He did not touch her more than necessary. But when they began walking through the trees, he kept himself between her and every other wolf, and every time she stumbled in the snow, his hand appeared at her elbow before he seemed to consciously decide to offer it. She did not take it. Not until the third stumble, when pain in her left ankle sent sparks behind her eyes and the trees blurred. Even then she only gripped his forearm. His skin was hot despite the cold. Solid. Real. "Mate," her wolf whispered again, softer this time, no less sure. Genevieve kept her face turned away and said nothing for the rest of the walk. The Valewood pack house was larger than anything in Ravencrest territory, built of dark timber and river stone, with broad steps and carved lintels blackened by generations of smoke. By the time they reached it, word had outrun them. Wolves waited in the outer hall. Some looked frightened. Some looked fascinated. Some looked at Genevieve as if she'd brought a blade to their alpha's throat. At once. She should be confined. Nikolai at once. She should be confined. Nikolai did not slow. Move. The healer named Death, the elder snapped, keeping pace. If she is truly your mate, then every hour she remains loose in this house endangers the pack. Genevieve stiffened. There it was already. Not woman, not guest. Omen. Nikolai's answer came without heat, which somehow made it colder. The pack is not endangered by an exhausted, half-frozen female in one broken manacle. It is endangered by what follows her. At that, Nikolai stopped so abruptly the elder nearly collided with him. The hall went silent. He turned with dreadful calm. Choose your next words carefully, Elder Merrick. Merrick's mouth tightened. I speak for caution. You speak of my mate as if she were plague. The word hit the room like a struck bell. Mate. He said it openly, before witnesses, before council blood and sentries and servants. Genevieve forgot to breathe. Merrick glanced at her, then back to Nikolai. A prophecy is not undone by naming. No, Nikolai said, but cowardice is made obvious by it. A few younger wolves lowered their eyes to hide reactions. Merrick flushed dark with anger. You would risk the line of Valewood for a female Ravencrest sold across a border? Nikolai took one step forward. Not many men could make a single step feel like a battlefield charge. I would suggest, he said softly, that you remember she crossed that border in chains because weaker wolves feared stronger enemies. Do not mistake what was done to her for what she is. Genevieve felt every gaze in the hall swing to her again, but differently now. Not all kinder, not all safer, but different. Merrick opened his mouth. Nikolai cut him off with a look sharp enough to draw blood. If there is disrespect for her under this roof, it is disrespect for me. Test that if you're lonely. The elder shut his mouth. Nikolai resumed walking. This time no one stepped into his path. He led Genevieve up one flight of stairs, down a corridor lit with oil lamps, and into a chamber at the far end with a heavy oak door and a narrow hearth already burning. It was plainly furnished. Bed, washstand, chest, one high window with shutters. No cage, no chains on the walls, no guards inside. She noticed all of that before she noticed the silence. When the door closed behind them, she turned at once, back hitting the wood. Why did you say that? Nikolai set a basin on the washstand with his uninjured hand. Because it is true. You barely know me. His eyes lifted to hers. My wolf does. The honesty of it landed harder than any practiced reassurance could have. She looked away first. He crossed to the hearth, dipped a cloth into warming water, then knelt. Genevieve stared. War alpha. Hidden king, if the rumors were worth anything. Scarred giant who could cow a hall full of wolves with one sentence. Kneeling. For the shackles, he said, as if this were ordinary. May I? She glanced down at the iron still clamped to her right wrist and the jagged edge of the left cuff biting skin. You're asking? Yes. No one asked. Not in Ravencrest. Not men. Not alphas. Not family. Suspicion rose immediately to fill the place where surprise had struck. Why? Something moved in his face, too brief to name. Because too much has already been taken from you by force. The room held still around them. Slowly, Genevieve extended her arm. Nikolai worked the lock first, using a narrow key from his belt. When the mechanism stuck, he did not curse or wrench harder. He braced her wrist carefully, warned, "This will hurt," and snapped the warped hinge with precise pressure. Iron fell away. She hissed despite herself. I know. His voice dropped. I know. The skin beneath the manacle was abraded raw, purple at the edges, with one strip torn open where she had ripped free. He cleaned it with warm water, gentle enough that shame stung hotter than pain. He asked before touching each cut, asked before turning her hand, asked before applying comfrey oil that smelled green and bitter and oddly clean. When she flinched at a sudden shift of firelight across his scarred face, he went motionless. There was no anger in it. That was almost worse. Genevieve closed her eyes briefly. I wasn't afraid, he supplied. She said nothing. Nikolai rose, then crossed the room and lit the remaining lamps one by one until every corner stood clear and bright. No shadows to hide in. No half-face softened by dark. When he turned back, every scar he bore was visible. This one, he said, touching the seam at his temple, came from Ironhold Steel at Red Gorge. This one, his fingers brushed a white mark at his throat, was a border garrote I failed to see in time. The hand you cut tonight split open years ago, taking a blade meant for my brother. It heals badly in winter. Genevieve looked at him despite herself. He was not making himself fearsome. He was making himself knowable. So if you look at me and flinch, he said, let it be for a reason I've given you, not because I kept you guessing in the dark. Her chest tightened in a way she didn't have words for. No man had ever handed her the truth that cleanly. Nikolai set the cloth aside. There is food coming. You may bolt the door if it helps you sleep. And you? She asked before she could stop herself. A hint of something almost wry touched his mouth. Outside it. You expect me to believe the great Valewood Alpha sleeps in the corridor because I might be frightened? If it keeps you resting instead of planning another escape, yes. That might have been arrogance, except the bond let her feel the strain under his calm now, the relentless pull toward her, the instinct to stay near, the iron restraint required not to crowd closer. He was not posting himself outside her room for theater. He was doing it because distance hurt, and he would rather hurt than frighten her. That realization unsettled her more than the bond had. A knock sounded. A servant entered only far enough to leave a tray, eyes downcast, then retreated. Nikolai moved to the door, pausing with one hand on the frame. In this house, he said without turning, no one enters unless you permit it. If anyone tries, call. Why would you think I'd call for you? He looked back then. Tired, fierce. On her wrists, and the taste of disbelief on her wrists, and the taste of disbelief thick on her tongue. After a long moment, she crossed to the door and slid the bolt into place. Then, against all good sense, she leaned close enough to hear. For several heartbeats, there was only quiet. Then the soft scrape of a large body settling on the floorboards outside. And after that, the low, unmistakable exhale of a wolf shifting form to keep watch through the night. Genevieve sank slowly to sit beside the bed, pressing her newly freed wrists to her chest. Beyond the door was a male she had every reason to fear. A male fate itself seemed to have marked for ruin beside her. A male powerful enough to cage her, claim her, use her, and call it law. Instead, he had asked permission. Instead, he had lit every shadow. Instead, he slept between her and the rest of his pack. She should have been planning escape routes. She should have been counting windows and weighing distances, and sharpening every instinct she owned against the danger of wanting what had no right to want her back. But with the hearth crackling and his wolf a warm, living presence on the other side of the wood, Genevieve found her guard doing something far more dangerous than falling. It was beginning, against her will, to bend. It was still dark when Genevieve woke. For one panicked second she didn't know where she was. Only that there was no chain at her waist, and no one shouting her name like a curse. Then the smell of banked coals and pine reached her, and beyond the door came the soft scrape of claws on wood. Nikolai. She lay still, listening to the rhythm of his breathing through the bond's strange, humming awareness. Not thoughts, not words, just presence. Large, wakeful, steady. By dawn, the pack house was already buzzing. When she unbolted the door, Nikolai was in human form, fully dressed, hair still damp from snowmelt. He rose from where he'd been sitting against the opposite wall and stepped back to give her room, as if even now every inch of distance was a choice he was making for her. You slept? He asked. Some. His gaze dropped briefly to the half-healed abrasions on her wrists, then returned to her face. Good. No declarations, no demands, no mention of what their wolves had recognized in the forest. A servant appeared to escort her to the lower hall for breakfast. Genevieve made it 3 steps down before she sensed him. Caspian Ironhold leaned against a carved support pillar near the long tables, a silver cup turning lazily between his fingers. Morning light polished the edges of his smile. Around him, Valewood elders bent closer when he spoke, like men warming hands over a controlled fire. Lady Genevieve, he said, inclining his head as if greeting honored nobility instead of a sold woman. You look far better out of irons. Valewood hospitality suits you. She stopped just beyond his reach. You called me tribute yesterday. A technical term. His smile widened. I prefer survivor. He glanced past her to where Nikolai descended the stairs. The smile did not change, but something in Caspian's eyes hardened with interest, predator bright. War Alpha, Caspian called warmly. I was just telling your council that prophecy breeds panic unless led with a firm hand. Nikolai didn't break stride. Then stop feeding it. A few heads turned. Caspian lifted both palms in theatrical surrender. I only want stability. All of us should. Stability, succession. The same word dressed in cleaner leather. Breakfast passed in strained fragments. Genevieve was seated at Nikolai's right by direct order, which did nothing to quiet the room. Wolves watched every movement between them, how close his arm came to hers, whether she flinched when he reached for bread, whether he noticed when she stopped eating. He noticed everything. After, she crossed the supply courtyard with a healer's apprentice who'd been told to show her the infirmary stores. Halfway there, voices stopped her near the cask sheds. Caspian stood in the shadow of a wagon with Valewood's quartermaster, a narrow-faced male named Tovin she'd seen counting ration sacks at the feast. Tovin's hands were shaking. I don't care how, Caspian was saying quietly. I care that the seventh night casks are exactly where I specified. Tovin swallowed. If the Alpha inspects, he won't inspect ceremony wine while being dragged into dominance challenges every other hour. Caspian's tone stayed almost gentle. You're being paid for precision, not courage. Genevieve stepped back before either could see her, heart thudding. The apprentice kept walking, oblivious. She told herself she'd misheard. She told herself wine logistics were not treason. Still, when she reached the infirmary, the scent of crushed herbs couldn't drown the memory of Caspian's voice. Not courage, precision. By noon, she knew exactly why he was dangerous. He never made the first move himself. He simply stood where fear already existed and gave it language. By afternoon, 2 lower-ranked Valewood dominants had issued formal challenge petitions citing pack security under omen conditions. By evening, 3 more. None aimed for the Alpha seat outright. Each one bled time, strength, attention. Each one forced Nikolai into ritual combat he could not refuse without appearing weak. Caspian watched every match from the rail, applauding with everyone else. The second day bled into the third in a cycle of controlled violence. Genevieve learned the layout of Valewood by necessity. Council hall, infirmary, training ring, stores, upper corridors where whispers followed her like smoke. She was never alone. Even when she moved freely, 2 sentries tracked at a respectful distance, protective and wary in equal measure. Nikolai spent most of those hours fighting. Not wars. Worse. Challenges bound by law, each one short enough to seem manageable, cumulative enough to hollow even a strong male by increments. Shoulder strike, rib bruise. Split knuckles reopened. The old scar in his palm tore again and again when claws met. After the 4th challenge, she found him in the washroom behind the ring, blood diluted pink down his forearm. Sit, she said. He looked up sharply as if surprised she'd followed. You should be in the upper rooms. So Caspian can count how well I obey? A rough sound, almost a laugh, left him before he caught it. He sank onto the bench without arguing. She cleaned his hand in silence, anger thrumming beneath her skin. How many can they force? As many as file. That's not law. That's organized exhaustion. Now you see Ironhold's strategy. She pressed a cloth harder than necessary. He didn't flinch. Through the bond, she felt fatigue like iron weights in wet wool. Beneath it, a relentless pull toward her that made his control feel expensive. "I heard Caspian speaking to your quartermaster," she said quietly. "About seventh night casks." Nikolai's gaze sharpened. "Where?" she told him. He nodded once. "I'll have the stores watched." "That's all?" "No." His jaw tightened. "But if I move on rumor without proof, he turns it into paranoia. He wants me striking shadows." Genevieve wrapped his palm and tied the strip neat. "Meanwhile, he's making everyone believe I'm a countdown to your funeral." Nikolai's expression went flat with controlled fury. "Anyone says that to you directly? Tell me." "And then what? Another challenge? Another body on the floor proving him right?" Silence stretched. From the yard outside came the thud of practice spears and the sharp call of commands, pack life grinding forward over the crack in its foundation. Nikolai rose. "I can't stop the fear in one day." "No," she said, meeting his eyes. "But you can stop pretending this is just fear. It's a campaign." Something in him stilled, then settled, as if a piece slid into place. "You're right." He reached, stopped before touching her, and let his hand fall. "Eat before sunset. Lock your door after dark." She hated that she heard care and command braided together and wanted both. By the third evening, pressure found new teeth. A pair of elder females cornered her outside the baths, all condolences and sharpened pity. "If you cared for him, child," one murmured, "you'd request seclusion until the omen passes. Spare us all watching fate choose." Genevieve walked away before she said something that would get her dragged before council. Her wolf paced inside her skin, restless, increasingly strong. Every time Nikolai passed within reach, heat climbed her throat and pooled low in her belly, infuriating and undeniable. Attraction didn't care about timing, instinct didn't care about prophecy, fear didn't care either. That night she stood at her window and watched torches move along the outer wall while snow came down in quiet, relentless sheets. 7 nights, the healer had said. The count was already underway. She found Nikolai in the map room after midnight. No guards inside, no council voices. Just him at a long table spread with border sketches, one lamp burning low, his shoulders bowed for the first time since she'd seen him. He looked up when she entered, tension spiking through the bond and easing when he recognized her. "You should be asleep." "So should you." He made a non-committal sound. Up close, she could see the bruise darkening beneath his left eye, the stiffness in his neck, where a challenger had nearly gotten a throat hold. Genevieve set a small crock of salve on the table. "Hold still." He did. She worked in quiet, fingers careful at his temple, along the edge of his jaw where swelling had started. His skin was warm, his stubble rough under her thumb. Every point of contact lit the bond like struck wire. His breathing changed. Barely, but enough. When she withdrew, he caught her wrist lightly. "Genevieve." Her name in his voice was warning and plea. "If you keep touching me like that, I'm going to forget every rule I set." Heat rushed through her, equal parts alarm and answer. She didn't pull away. "Would that frighten me?" she asked. "Or you?" His eyes went molten gold at the edges. Both. The honesty undid her faster than charm could have. She sat opposite him, needing distance, hating it immediately. "Why does Caspian want you drained instead of dead?" Nikolai leaned back, exhaled once. "Because a dead rival is martyrdom. A weakened one is a lesson." He tapped the map where 3 territories met at the river forks. "My father held alliances by force. When he died, I refused the crown title until councils could be rewritten. Caspian calls that hesitation. He's been selling himself as the stable alternative ever since." "And me?" His mouth hardened. You are the knife he didn't have to forge. A tribute female from a defeated pack. A prophecy attached to my throat. If one of us dies, he calls it fate and steps into the power vacuum. Genevieve swallowed. And if it's you? Then he takes Valewood in the name of continuity. Nikolai's gaze held hers, unblinking. And he takes you as treaty asset. Cold slid through her despite the fire. She laughed once, brittle. I keep getting traded by men who call it policy. Not by me. You don't own that choice. Something fierce moved across his face. No, you do. The room went very still. She stared at him, at the male every rumor named ruthless, and saw the thread running through every hour since the forest. Ask, don't take. Protect, don't possess. Hold the line, even when instinct howled otherwise. Her voice came out smaller than she intended. I don't know how to do this. His expression softened, devastatingly. Neither do I. A pause. The crackle of lamp wick. Snow tapping faintly against shutters. Then, quietly, in Ravencrest, she said, my healing was called half-formed, useless if it didn't mend bone in minutes. So they stopped training me. Said weak gifts waste resources. Nikolai went utterly still. Show me your hand. She extended it. He turned it palm up, thumb brushing the old scar crossing her lifeline, a childhood cut she'd never fully closed. He touched the mark as if it offended him personally. They lied to you, he said. How would you know? Because your touch took fire out of my nerves tonight before the salve ever hit skin. She blinked. I thought that was the bond. It was you through it. The word struck somewhere deep and aching. She looked down before he could watch her break around the edges. When his fingers slid from her palm to lace briefly through hers, she let them. No claim, no pressure, just warmth shared in the space between fear and wanting. After a long moment, he released her first. Go sleep, he murmured. Tomorrow will be worse. She almost smiled. Comforting. It's honest. She stood, then paused at the door. Nikolai. He looked up. If they force a cage, she said, throat tight, I won't go quietly. A grim, proud light touched his eyes. Good. Tomorrow was worse. By mid-morning on the fourth day, the council chamber was full. Elders packed both benches. Lieutenants lined the walls. Caspian stood near the central brazier in immaculate black, concern arranged on his face like formal jewelry. Genevieve stood at Nikolai's side and felt hostility roll off the room in waves. Elder Merrick rose first. Given escalating unrest and confirmed mate omen conditions, I petition emergency containment of Genevieve Ravencrest in a silver ward until seventh night concludes. Murmurs of approval. Another elder stood. For the Alpha's safety. A third. For pack stability. Caspian bowed his head slightly, voice smooth as poured oil. No one doubts Alpha Nikolai's strength. But leadership means preparing for possibility, not denying it. Temporary seclusion is a mercy to all parties. Mercy. Genevieve's nails bit her palms. Nikolai stepped forward before she could speak. Denied. Merrick's mouth thinned. By what grounds? By mine. This is bigger than one male's attachment. The chamber cracked with low growls. Caspian did not move, but satisfaction flickered at the corner of his mouth. Nikolai's control snapped into something colder than anger. He drew his claw across his own palm, deep enough for blood to well fast and bright. Before anyone understood, he turned, took Genevieve's hand, and dragged the bleeding claw in a sharp arc on the stone floor around where she stood. One line, then another, completing a rough circle that glistened dark in firelight. Alpha bloodline law, she stands under my blood. Any wolf who she stands under my blood. Any wolf who crosses this line without her consent challenges me directly. Not in council. In combat. To death if required. Silence crashed down. Caspian's expression finally shifted, smile thinning. Dramatic. Nikolai didn't look at him. Step over it and test whether drama bleeds. No one moved. Even Merrick sat slowly, color gone from his face. The session dissolved in ragged clusters. Some wolves stormed out. Some lingered, recalculating risk. Caspian gave Genevieve a long, measuring look before he left, as if adjusting plans in real time. By nightfall, the air in the pack house felt like held breath. Nikolai refused to leave the corridor outside her chamber. This time he stayed in human form, back to the wall, sword across his knees, bloodline circle from council still faintly stained beneath his nails. 2 trusted sentries took opposite stairs. Midnight passed. Then the first assassin came through the ceiling crawl space. Genevieve heard wood creak above her bed and rolled, just as a blade punched through blankets. She screamed Nikolai's name. The door exploded inward. Nikolai hit the attacker in a blur of claws and teeth, slamming him into the hearth. A second shadow rushed from the window shutters. A sentry dragged him back with a snarl. Steel rang. Someone shouted from the hall. A third wolf shifted mid-leap, huge and gray, driving straight for Genevieve's throat. She grabbed the iron fire poker and swung. It connected with bone. The wolf twisted anyway, claws raking her shoulder through linen. White pain flashed. Nikolai killed the first attacker and spun toward her, but the gray wolf was already on her, jaws opening. A knife flew from the doorway and buried in the wolf's neck. He dropped across her legs, convulsing. For one ringing second, everything stopped. Then Nikolai was there, hauling the body off her, hands frantic over her shoulder wound. Where? Here, she gasped, fingers slick with blood. His face changed as he scented it. Not just blood, something else. Bitter. Resin sharp. Wolfsbane, he snarled. In the hall, one surviving assassin tore free of a sentry and bit down on his own tongue before anyone could stop him, choking on blood rather than speak. Nikolai shouted for the healer. Boots thundered. Alarms began to howl from the outer walls, 1 horn, then 2, then a third from the border watchtower. Coordinated, timed. Caspian's hand, Genevieve thought wildly through pain, her vision blurred at the edges. Heat crawled from the claw marks up her neck, wrong and burning. Nikolai gathered her against his chest, voice shaking for the first time. Stay with me. She tried to answer, but the room tilted hard, and through the roaring in her ears she heard the horns keep sounding. Closer, faster, like the valley itself was warning that the 7th night had started killing early. Keep pressure there. The court healer's hands were red to the wrist as she packed crushed charcoal and yarrow into the claw marks on Genevieve's shoulder. Do not let her sleep. I'm not sleeping, Genevieve managed, though her teeth were chattering hard enough to blur the words. The room stank of blood, smoke, and the bitter metal reek of wolfsbane. Outside, horns kept sounding from wall to wall. 3 short blasts. Pause. 3 more. Attack pattern. Border pressure. Nikolai knelt beside the pallet, one hand on her uninjured shoulder, the other still bleeding through a hastily wrapped strip where he'd torn his own claw open again, killing the assassin. His skin was too hot, his breathing too shallow. Through the bond, she felt rage like a live coal, and something underneath it she hated more. Weakness creeping through him in slow, deliberate threads. The healer looked up sharply, gaze snapping between them. How much ceremonial wine did you drink at handover? Nikolai frowned. 1 cup. 2 swallows, Genevieve whispered. Maybe 3? The old woman swore. Nikolai's head lifted. Speak plainly. Wolfsbane resin can be compounded to lie dormant in diluted alcohol. Her mouth tightened. It activates when mate bond magic starts sealing, not enough to kill outright at once, enough to make prophecy look true on schedule. Silence punched the room hollow. Nikolai's voice turned to iron. You're saying this was engineered. I'm saying someone wanted your seventh night to end in a funeral and called it fate. She cinched the bandage on Genevieve's shoulder until stars burst behind Genevieve's eyes. And whoever arranged those assassins is not done. The toxin is already in both your systems. Stress accelerates it. As if summoned by the words, the chamber door slammed open. A lieutenant, Kellen, broad and mud-splattered, strode in without waiting for permission. "Outer east wall engaged," he said. "Ironhold raiders at the ravine. Light force, probing. Enough to keep half our fighters pinned." Nikolai rose in one smooth, dangerous motion. Kellen added, jaw tight. "Council is assembling in the lower hall. Caspian is advising immediate emergency transfer of Genevieve to a silver ward." Of course he was. Genevieve pushed herself upright, vision swimming. "No." Nikolai turned on her. "You're not moving from this room." "Caspian timed this," she said, breath rough. "Border attack to split your fighters, assassins inside, then council panic. If they lock me away, he controls the story by dawn." "I don't care about story if you're dead." "I do." She gripped the edge of the pallet until her knuckles whitened. "Because story is how he kills you without touching you." Nikolai's wolf flashed in his eyes, gold bright and furious. For one raw second she thought he would simply pick her up and bar the door from outside. Instead, he looked at the healer. "Can she fight?" The old woman snorted. "She can stand if stubbornness counts as medicine." Genevieve bared her teeth in something like a smile. "It does." Kellen shifted uneasily. "Alpha, with respect, council's waiting. Merrick is already demanding the cage." "Let him demand," Nikolai said. "No one moves her without me." He bent, forehead touching Genevieve's for one heartbeat, a gesture so intimate her lungs forgot their work. "Stay with healers. Open stairs while raiders are at the wall. Open stairs while raiders are at the wall. I will tie you to this bed myself." He straightened before she could answer and left with Kellen at his heels. The healer watched him go, then began grinding more herbs in a stone bowl. "He can still command," she muttered. "Good sign." Genevieve stared at the closed door. Through the bond, Nikolai's presence moved fast down corridors lined with hostility. Hard, focused, fraying. "Not good enough," she said. The healer glanced up. "What did you hear?" "In the cask sheds. Caspian and the quartermaster. Seventh night casks." The old woman's hands stopped. Genevieve swung her legs off the pallet. The room tilted. She caught herself on the table and kept standing. If poison was in ceremonial wine once, it can be in it again. Tonight's moon ceremony will gather every ranking wolf in one circle. If those casks are tainted, he won't just kill us, he'll cripple Valewood. "You're fevered." "I'm right." A long, assessing silence. Then the healer reached for a leather satchel and shoved it at her. "Take this. Dried moonleaf, charcoal tincture, silver test pins. Your gift can track impurities?" Genevieve blinked. "I was told it was half-formed." The old woman's eyes sharpened. "Half-trained, maybe. Not half-formed. Find me the source." Genevieve grabbed the satchel. 2 sentries blocked the infirmary threshold when she reached it. "Alpha's orders," one said. "You remain under guard." She met his gaze flatly. "Then guard me to the stores." They hesitated. From below, the roar of council voices surged through stone. A crash. Nikolai, likely overturning someone's argument by force. "Order. You can explain that to your order. You can explain that to your Alpha's corpse." That got them moving. The storage yard was chaos. Servants hauling water, runners carrying arrows to the wall, wolves shouting inventory over each other. Snow came down harder now, hissing where it hit torch flames. Genevieve went straight to the ceremonial stacks, 12 oak casks marked with lunar sigils for the 7th night rite. Tovin the quartermaster stood beside them with 3 workers and a ledger clutched to his chest. When he saw her, color drained from his face. "Lady, this area is restricted. Open them." He swallowed. "By council order? Only after moonrise." She took a silver test pin from the healer's satchel and drove it through the bung of the nearest cask, drew it out. The tip blackened almost instantly. One worker crossed himself and backed away. Genevieve moved to the second cask. Black again. Third. Black. Wolfsbane resin. Her skin went cold under the fever. "Who loaded these?" she asked. Tovin's mouth worked. No sound. She slammed his ledger from his arms, pages spilling into slush. A small leather pouch fell from inside and split open, iron-hulled minted silver scattering across the ground. Everyone in earshot went still. Tovin dropped to his knees, scrambling for coins. "It's not what it looks like." Genevieve caught a fistful of his hair and hauled him upright. Pain screamed through her shoulder. She held on anyway. "You're coming with me." He clawed at her wrist. "Let go." "Not this time." She shoved him toward the central path with the test pin still black in her other hand. The two sentries flanked them, faces grim now that denial was gone. "Where?" one asked. Genevieve looked toward the horn-lit dark where the ancient standing stones rose beyond the packhouse roofs. Wolves were already gathering there for the moon ceremony despite alarms, because ritual held panic together, because packs clung to tradition when everything else shook. "Stone circle," she said, in front of everyone. By the time they reached the circle, snow had turned to sleet. Torches ringed the stones in wavering gold. Valewood wolves packed the outer edge shoulder to shoulder. Iron-hulled observers stood in a separate knot, black leather gleaming wet. At the center, council members argued over protocol while runners came and went from the wall with casualty reports. Caspian stood near the altar stone, calm as if hosting a feast. Nikolai was 3 paces away, blood on his knuckles, one cheek swelling where someone had struck him in council or tried. When he saw Genevieve dragging Tovin by the collar, fury and relief crashed through the bond so hard her knees nearly buckled. He stalked toward her. "What did I tell you?" She shoved the quartermaster forward between them. "That I should stay hidden while your enemy poisoned your house." Tovin hit the stones hard and tried to crawl. Kellen kicked him onto his back. Voices erupted. "What is this?" "Quartermaster? Why is she bleeding?" Genevieve lifted the blackened silver pin high. "These are from your ceremony casks. All 12 are laced with wolfsbane resin." Shock rolled through the circle in a physical wave. Merrick staggered back as if struck. Caspian's brows rose in perfect concern. A grave accusation from someone currently under toxin-induced distress. Genevieve snapped toward him. "Then let him deny the coins in his ledger." She threw the torn pouch at Caspian's boots. Iron-hulled silver spilled across sacred stone. Caspian did not look down. Nikolai crouched, seized Tovin by the throat, and hauled him up until their noses nearly touched. "Speak," Tovin sobbed. He said it was only to calm the pack, just enough to make the omen seem true. He said if one of you fell, war would stop. "Who said?" Nikolai's voice was almost gentle, which made it terrifying. Tovin's eyes darted to Caspian. "Ironhold, Caspian, please, Alpha, please." The circle exploded. Growls, shouts, bodies surging. Ironhold wolves reached for weapons. Valewood sentries closed ranks around Nikolai and Genevieve. Caspian lifted one hand for silence he no longer controlled. "Confession under duress," he said coolly. "From a bribable clerk. Convenient." Genevieve stepped into the very center of the stones, rain and sleet slicking her hair to her face. She raised her voice until it cut through the uproar. "Convenient is prophecy when you're too cowardly to challenge clean. Convenient is calling women tribute so no one asks who profits when they die." The circle quieted by degrees. She turned slowly, making every pack see her. "I was sold to end a war I did not start. You put chains on me and called it law. You put fear on us and called it fate. Tonight I call it what it is." She drew in a breath that burned all the way down and shouted, "Sabotage." Then, clearer, formal, the old words rising from memory she hadn't known she still carried. By Fang and Moon, I invoke the right of chosen bond. Witnessed Pax, hear me. I am no tribute. I choose my mate by my own will. Gasps answered her from both sides of the ring. Nikolai went absolutely still. Genevieve faced him across wet stone and pain and prophecy. I choose Nikolai Valewood. The bond flared like lightning under skin. Caspian moved. He shifted mid-charge, bones snapping into massive gray-black wolf form before half the circle registered motion. Lunged. Steel flashed. Caspian shifted, lunged. Steel flashed. Caspian shifted back to human just long enough to grin at Genevieve over Nikolai's pinned body, teeth blood-bright. The healer named your grave. Little tribute? He purred. Choose who dies prettier. He lunged for her throat. Genevieve sidestepped on instinct and fury. His fingers grazed her jaw, missed purchase. She seized the fallen short blade from a dead sentry's hand, silver inlaid, narrow, wicked, and drove it with both hands into Caspian's left shoulder, exactly where she'd watched him favor old damage all week beneath his polished composure. The blade punched deep. Caspian howled. She wrenched sideways, ripping muscle. He stumbled, off balance for one fatal heartbeat. Nikolai exploded upward in full wolf form, bigger than any wolf she had ever seen, scarred muzzle red with his own blood. He hit Caspian's center mass and drove him onto his back. Teeth clamped Caspian's throat before he could shift clear. Caspian, choking, still found breath enough to spit words through blood. Prophecy. Always feeds. On love? Genevieve stood over him, chest heaving, blade slick in her hand. No, she said, voice like iron. Cowards do. Nikolai bit down. Bone crunched. Caspian's body convulsed once, twice, then went limp on the stones. For a moment no one moved. Rain hissed on torches. Far off, wall horns stuttered and fell silent one by one as news outran sound. Ironhold Command had just died in Valewood Circle, witnessed by both packs. Challenge ended under law. Nikolai shifted back, swaying, blood pouring from a gash at his temple where he'd hit the altar. He took one step toward Genevieve and dropped to one knee. Disobeyed me. She laughed once. Half sob. You disobeyed me? She laughed once. Half sob. Get used to it. The healer pushed through the crowd, kneeling beside them with curses under her breath. She touched Nikolai's pulse, then Genevieve's, and went pale. The resin's peaking, she said. You don't have hours, maybe minutes. Nikolai bared his teeth against a wave of pain. Antidote. Not enough for both, not at this stage. The healer looked up, eyes hard as winter glass. Only one thing will force the toxins to burn out through shared magic now. Genevieve knew before she said it. The healer nodded once. Complete the bond, here, fully. Or lose one by dawn. Around them, the circle held breath. Nikolai turned to Genevieve, blood and rain running down his face. Your choice, he said hoarsely. Always. Her answer came without hesitation. Yes. They stood together in the same stone circle where Caspian's body still lay covered at the edge beneath a cloak. Witnesses ringed them. Valewood. Ironhold remnants under guard. Ravencrest envoys dragged from their guest quarters half-armored and stunned. Garen was among them, mud to his knees, staring as if he no longer knew what she was. Good. The healer drew a clean arc of salt and ash around Genevieve and Nikolai, then stepped back. Consent before moon and witness, she said. Speak it. Nikolai faced Genevieve fully. He was shaking now, fever bright. But his voice did not waver. Genevieve Ravencrest, do you choose this bond with me? No coercion, no debt, no tribute claim, by your own will? She held his gaze. I do. Nikolai Valewood, Do you choose me as equal in rank and right? In peace and war? His wolf flashed in his eyes, fierce and aching. I do. The healer lifted her hand. Then Mark. Nikolai stepped in slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. She didn't. He cupped her jaw, thumb brushing the pulse hammering at her throat, and paused there, forehead against hers. Mine, he whispered, so low only she could hear. Yours, she breathed back. Mate. The word shuddered through both of them. He turned her gently, one hand at her waist, the other steady on her shoulder just above the bandaged claw marks. His mouth brushed the junction of her neck and shoulder first. Warm, reverent, a question. Gooseflesh raced down her arms despite the fever. Then his teeth sank in. Pain lanced bright and sharp, enough to arch her spine on a cry. For one blinding second it was only bite, pressure, blood. Then the pain changed. Opened, heat, flooding from the wound in pulsing waves that weren't just physical. Magic rushed through the mark like a river breaking a dam. Smoke and pine, winter air, iron command, the thud of his heart sinking against hers. Her knees buckled, his arm locked around her, holding her upright while his bite gentled, then released. Blood ran warm down her collarbone. The wound burned and then began to throb with strange, deep pleasure that made her gasp. Nikolai staggered back half a step and bared his neck to her, exposing scar tissue along the shoulder where an old blade had once nearly ended him. His voice was ragged. Your turn. Genevieve's wolf surged forward, no longer timid, no longer hidden. She stepped into him, fingers fisting in his wet hair to hold him still. Mine, she said against his skin, tasting rain and blood. He shuddered. Yours. Mate. She bit hard. His groan tore through the circle, half pain, half relief, so raw it made several wolves look away. Blood filled her mouth, hot and metallic. Place between them, a gate slamming shut place between them, a gate slamming shut against the world. Power flooded both directions at once. She felt his memories not as pictures, but as impressions. Snow on battlefields, the weight of command, lonely nights in a too-large room, the exact moment in the forest he'd recognized her and chosen restraint over instinct. He felt hers. Chains, raven-crest contempt, hunger to be seen as more than useful or expendable, the small, stubborn core that had kept choosing life anyway. The wolfsbane fire hit that joined current and broke. Genevieve gasped as the burning in her veins turned cold, then clear, like poison dragged through ice and expelled. Nikolai convulsed once in her arms, coughed dark fluid to the stones, then sucked in a full, clean breath for the first time all night. Around them, wolves murmured. Shock, awe, fear turned sideways into reverence. Nikolai gathered her to him, both of them swaying, blood-mixed and shaking. His forehead rested against hers. 7 days they gave us, he whispered, voice wrecked and fierce. We'll take every year after. She smiled through tears she refused to call weakness. I was never tribute. His hand tightened at her waist. No. She kissed the corner of his scarred mouth. I was always your equal. High enough to order me? She huffed a laugh. Constantly. Good. He kissed her then. Salt, blood, rain, and promise, while the moon broke through torn clouds and lit the stones silver. Outside the circle, Elder Merrick sank to one knee first, then Kellen. Then, one by one, the rest of Valewood followed. Not to him. To both of them. Morning came hard and bright. Caspian's body lay on a bier in the lower courtyard, witnessed signatures already burned into the challenge record. Lawful death in open combat after proven sabotage. No martyr story left to spin. Tovin the quartermaster stood in irons before council, sobbing through full confession while the healer presented the blackened silver pins and recovered cask samples. Sentence was swift. Life labor at river quarantine camps under healer authority. No rank, no vote, no weapon. You poisoned your own pack, Nikolai said. You spend the rest of your life cleaning what poison leaves behind. Elder Merrick requested the floor next. His face looked 20 years older. I called for a cage, he said to Genevieve, voice rough. I was wrong. She held his gaze. You were afraid. Yes. Then learn better fear. She stepped forward so the whole hall could hear. From this day, no wolf in Valewood will be confined by omen, rumor, or mating status without trial under written law, not elders' panic. Law. Merrick bowed his head. Recorded. By noon, representatives from Ravencrest arrived under truce flag, Garen among them, trying for injured dignity and getting none. When he began, as her blood guardian, I request. Genevieve cut him off. You forfeited that claim at the border. Silence. Delicious and absolute. She turned to the neutral clerk. Strike any Ravencrest guardianship language from prior treaty appendices. The clerk scratched rapidly. Struck. Nikolai sat beside her at the high table, marked throat visible above open collar, scarred hand resting near hers but not over it. Equal, as promised. The rewritten treaty took 6 hours and 3 shouting matches. When it was done, every delegate pressed thumbprint to wax under a new first clause. No pack may exchange sentient lives as tribute, collateral, or succession payment. Additional clauses followed at Genevieve's insistence. Elected inter-pack councils every winter moon. Mutual defense triggers requiring 2-pack confirmation. Healer neutrality in all conflicts. Prisoner protections and audit rights she would oversee personally. When the final seal cooled, the old court healer thumped her staff once on stone. Witnessed and binding. Nikolai stood. Valewood recognizes Genevieve Ravencrest Valewood as High Luna and War Healer, autonomous in treaty review, medicine governance, and prisoner law. Her authority stands in writing and cannot be revoked by mate or council without full pack vote. He handed her the signed charter. Not a gift. A transfer. Genevieve took it and turned to the room. Then hear mine. Ravencrest prisoners currently held in Valewood camps are released by sundown with medical escort. Ironhold wounded are treated before transport, regardless of rank. We do not build peace on stacked bodies. No one argued. At dusk, when the hall finally emptied, she found Nikolai in the doorway watching snowmelt drip from eaves. He glanced at the charter in her hand. High Luna. She leaned against his shoulder, careful of healing bruises. Hidden King. He made a face. Don't start. She smiled. Too late. A year later, under a clear spring moon, they returned to the stone circle. No blood on the stones now. Wild thyme grew between cracks where rain had washed everything else away. Wolves ringed the clearing in ceremonial dress, not armor. Children dozed on blankets while elders pretended not to wipe their eyes. Genevieve wore green and silver, her mark visible at her throat. Nikolai wore no crown, only the same scars and the mark she'd left in his shoulder bared by open collar as deliberate answer to every rival alpha watching from the outer ring. They joined hands at center stone. Again? He murmured. Every year, she said, so no one forgets. He bent, kissed the mark at her neck without breaking skin, and whispered, Mine. She touched the scar at his shoulder and answered, Yours. Together, smiling this time, they said, Mate. Around them, the packs echoed it back like a vow and a warning. Prophecy had promised one grave by the 7th night. Instead, she chose, fought, marked, ruled, and lived.